Good morning. This is the fifth Sunday in the season of Lent. For those that don't know me, other than those that are watching from Redeemer Lutheran Church, I am Pastor Tom Taylor, the intentional interim pastor at Redeemer. And I just want to give you a brief overview of what will happen for the service this morning, or whenever you are going to watch this. Is I will read a portion, about 1/3 to 1/2 of the gospel reading for today, from John chapter 11. I'll be reading verses 21 through 39 if you wish to follow along. And then I'll offer a homily / sermon, and then I will take a moment to encourage you to follow a link to a service at Ascension Lutheran Church in Thousand Oaks, California, where one of Redeemer's former interns is the senior pastor, and I'll say more about him and the congregation towards the end. Now I'd like to read a portion of our scripture for today, again from John 11, starting at verse 21. Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now, I know that God will give you whatever you ask of him." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha said to him, "I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live, and everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this?" She said to him, "Yes, Lord. I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one coming into the world." When she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary and told her privately, "The teacher is here and is calling for you." And when she heard it, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come to the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. The Judeans, who were with her in the house, consoling her, saw Mary get up quickly and go out. They followed her because they thought that she was going to the tomb to weep there. When Mary came where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Judeans who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. He said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Lord, come and see." Jesus began to weep. So the Judeans said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" Then Jesus, again greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." The gospel passage goes on and talks about Jesus calling forth Lazarus from the tomb after being dead for 4 days. In essence, Jesus resuscitates Lazarus. Jesus was close friends with Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, all siblings. Jesus loved them. He cared for them. There are many instances where Jesus interacts, in particular with Mary and Martha. Lazarus has died, and Jesus' humanity comes out in John's passage here. John reminds us in verse 33, when Jesus saw her weeping, and the Judeans who came with her also weeping, that he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. In verse 35, a standalone verse, the only time in the Gospels that I can recall where Jesus shows that this kind of emotion, John reminds us that Jesus began to weep. And then in verse 38, then Jesus, again greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. The greatly disturbed and Jesus weeping clearly reminds us about the fact that Jesus was human. He was fully human and also fully divine. We are reminded that Jesus had emotions, just like we have emotions. He had fears, he had anxieties, and he had concerns, just like we do. We are in unprecedented times. We are with this coronavirus in a pandemic that is worldwide. It's no doubt that for most of us, I think, it would be unusual not to have feelings of anxiety, of fear, of worrying about the future. How long will we be in our homes? When can we go out again? When can we safely congregate in our churches again? When can we physically be in touch with each other? Well, I suspect, at least what the healthcare professionals are telling us, it could be weeks or months away. We just simply do not know. In one of my devotionals the other day, ironically, Sharon Salzberg, one of the great teachers of meditation in the world, said in her meditation for the day, she felt sad. And rather than try to brush that away or stick that in a compartment in her mind or in her heart, she felt that sadness and asked for it to come forward. And then in dealing with that sadness, she was able to also look at other aspects of her life and have some sense of joy and comfort too. We can balance both those two things at the same time, even though it's very difficult to do. It's hard to be both anxious and grateful, isn't it? It's hard to be full of fear and gratitude. It's difficult, but we can walk and chew bubblegum at the same time. As an introvert and as somebody who has an anxiety disorder, I can tell you that it is not easy to do. It is very, very difficult. But I'm inspired by people who have been there, who have been into the abyss, and who have come out and can teach us many things. I was reading an article that was published in the Harvard Business Review. The interviewer, Scott, and the author of the piece, Scott Biranato, interviewed an expert on grief by the name of David Kessler. Mr. Kessler worked with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, certainly an expert on grief. And in his most recent book is called Finding Meaning, the Sixth Stage of Grief. In the interview, and I'm going to read a portion of it because I think it's so relevant in today's world and what we're going through today. Scott asked this question of David: what can individuals do to manage all this grief? Because early in the interview, David said that basically what we're manifesting is underneath that anxiety and fear and projection into the future about worry and what will happen and when will we come out of this? Will I get the disease? Will a loved one get the disease? Will someone I know get it? How can we be safe in the future? All those are very good questions to ask and relevant and certainly normal. He says really underneath that is a sense of grief and loss. It's a loss of control because we don't have much control, do we? And so he answers the question, what can individuals do to manage all this grief? He says, understanding the stages of grief is a start. But whenever I talk about the stages of grief, I have to remind people that the stages aren't linear and may not happen in this order. It is not a map, but it provides some scaffolding for this unknown world. There is denial, which we say a lot of early on. This virus won't affect us. There's anger. You're making me stay home and taking away my activities. There's bargaining. Okay, if I social distance for 2 weeks, everything will be better, right? There's sadness. I don't know when this will end. And finally, there's acceptance. This is happening. I have to figure out how to proceed. Acceptance, as you might imagine, is where the power lies. We find control in acceptance. I can wash my hands. I can keep a safe distance. I can learn how to work virtually. When we're feeling grief, there's that physical pain and the racing mind. And there are techniques to deal with that to make it less intense. Let's go back to what he calls anticipatory grief. Unhealthy anticipatory grief is really anxiety. That's the feeling you're talking about. Our mind begins to show us images. My parents getting sick. We see the worst case scenarios. That's our minds being protective. Our goal is not to ignore these images or to try to make them go away. Your mind won't let you do that, and it can be painful to try and force it. The goal is to find balance in the things you're thinking. If you feel the worst image taking shape, Make yourself think of the best image. We all get a little sick and the world continues. Not everyone I love dies. Maybe no one does, because we're all taking the right steps. Neither scenario should be ignored, but neither should dominate either. Anticipatory grief is the mind going to the future and imagining the worst. To calm yourself, you want to come into the present. This will be familiar advice to anyone who has meditated or practiced mindfulness. But people are always surprised at how prosaic this can be. You can name 5 things in the room. There's a computer, a chair, a picture of the dog, an old rug, and a coffee mug. It's that simple. Breathe. Realize that in the present moment, nothing you've anticipated has happened. In this moment, you're okay. You have food. You are not sick. Use your senses and think about what they feel. The desk is hard. The blanket is soft. I can feel the breath coming into my nose. This really will work to dampen some of that pain. You can also think about how to let go of what you can't control, what your neighbor is doing out of your control. What is in your control is staying 6 feet away from them and washing your hands. Focus on that. Finally, it's a good time to stock up on compassion. Everyone will have different levels of fear and grief, and it manifests in different ways. A coworker got very snippy with me the other day, and I thought, that's not like this person. That's how they're dealing with this. I'm seeing their fear and anxiety. So be patient. Think about how someone usually is, and not who they seem to be in this moment. One particularly troubling aspect of this pandemic is the open-endedness of it. This is a temporary state. It helps to say it. I worked for 10 years in the hospital system. I've been trained for situations like this. I've also studied the 1918 flu pandemic. The precautions we're taking are the right ones. History tells us that. This is survivable. We will survive. This is a time to overprotect, but not overreact. And I believe we will find meaning in it. I've been honored that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's family has given me permission to add a 6th stage to grief. Meaning. I had talked to Elizabeth quite a bit about what came after acceptance. I did not want to stop at acceptance when I experienced some personal grief. I wanted meaning in those darkest hours. And I do believe we find light in those times. Even now, people are realizing they can connect through technology. They are not as remote as they thought. They are realizing they can use their phones for long conversations. They are appreciating walks. I believe we will continue to find meaning now and when this is over. Some sage words from David Kessler. He's right. We will get out of this. We don't know when exactly. That is out of our control. So we can keep safe social distance. We can wash our hands. We can do the things we've been asked to do. And yet also acknowledge the anxiety and fears and the uncertainty of the future as well. One of the things that has given me great inspiration, a couple of days ago, I didn't see today's press conference, but Andrew Cuomo had mentioned that there were a number of volunteers that had come forward out of retirement, and as of yesterday, I'm recording this on Friday evening, as of Thursday, there were over 52,000 nurses and doctors retired out of the system, enjoying retirement, came forward, and it's probably much higher today, in order to help out with this crisis in the hospital systems that we have. That is astounding to me, and that is inspiring and uplifting. I have so much gratitude for those women and men who are doing this. Governor Cuomo also mentioned that there are over 8,000 licensed mental health professionals who have come forward, and not just from New York, and also with the nurses and doctors, not just from the state of New York, but from other states who have volunteered their time. And these mental health professionals have volunteered their time in order to listen to people's fears and anxieties and uncertainties. And at the end of it all, he said, thank God for them. Thank God for them. And I say thank God for them too. Thank God for the first responders that we have, the classical first responders that we call firefighters and police officers and EMS workers, paramedics and EMTs that are literally on the front lines. Whenever they respond to a call, how are they ever going to know whether that person might have the virus? They don't. And so they put their own lives at risk. For our National Guard troops and all those that serve in the military as well, we owe them our thanks, our gratitude, and whenever we run across them anywhere, I think from now on in the future, I'm going to make a point to thank them for their service and their dedication. To me, that's what discipleship is about. That's what loving your neighbor as yourself is about. Compassion and care for the other, even at your own risk. So as I end today, I just want to thank all of you. I will continue to keep all of you in my thoughts and prayers. Please do so for me and my family. And what can we do besides washing our hands and keeping a safe social distance? Well, I think we can call our neighbors. We can call fellow members of our congregations. We can check in on people and see how they're doing. Are you okay? Do you have enough medication? Do you have enough food? Do you have enough toilet paper? I hope so. Those kinds of things are really, really important to stay connected. I'm learning about technology. Over a year ago, I bought this microphone and this Zoom thinking someday I would do a podcast. And it sat there and never got used. Until today. So, here it is. Maybe it was meant to be. I don't know. But we can do things. We can use technology. I've learned a lot about Zoom that I never knew before. We can use technology to relate to each other, not only during this time of crisis and the time when we're in our homes and cannot physically be with each other at meetings and gatherings, but perhaps it's a lesson for us in the future too, that we can use this technology to our advantage later on after this crisis passes. Whatever it may be, continue to be there for each other, and I hope that all of you might be safe and be well. And now it is my honor to give a brief introduction to the link that you'll have in linking up to Pastor Tim Delsekamp. Hopefully I pronounced Pastor Tim's last name correctly. Pastor Tim is the senior pastor at Ascension Lutheran Church in Thousand Oaks, California, about 40 miles north of Los Angeles. Tim was vicar at Redeemer Lutheran Church from 1996 through 1997 under the supervision of Pastor Al Ulstrom. In fact, he was Pastor Al's last intern. What ultimately became our Wednesday worship service, which, by the way, before we suspended all worship services, the average attendance at this Wednesday worship was somewhere between 85 and 100, which is quite remarkable. But at any rate, this Wednesday worship service was actually then Vicar Tim's internship project. And obviously it has evolved significantly since then. So please enjoy Pastor Tim and the service at Ascension Lutheran Church. And my thanks to them for welcoming us into their service. And again, be safe, be well. God's blessings and peace be with you all until we meet again.